I still don't know what's going on. Everything's gotten worse, but I think I'm on the verge of understanding things. Ever since waking up in the woods, my memory is nearly eidetic, especially when it comes to conversations. Maybe because there's so much empty space in my mind now, maybe because effectively having no memories is so terrifying I'm overcompensating on a subconscious level. In any case, I've been able to recall everything. So here it is. When Michael and I got home from breakfast, I took a shower. As I undressed, I noticed I was wounded. Half-healed cuts slashed the tops of my feet and wound up to my thighs in neat clinical lines. I also had twin wounds at the joints, where bicep met forearm. They were bruisey and welted. The swelling and discoloration made me look dead below the waist. I tried to remember what happened, but of course, no luck. It was hideous and frightening, and looking at it made me cry. After dithering, I called Michael in. Maybe it was my paranoia, but he didn't look half as shocked as I had expected. Which makes sense. He knows a lot more about what happened at the facility than I do, right?
Let's go see the doctor. We need to sue the facility, and we need records to do it.
I finished my shower, choking back tears the entire time. Then we went to the doctor. The office was empty, efficient, and unfamiliar. The doctor knew me, though. She swabbed the cuts with disinfectant and prescribed me antibiotics without batting an eye. "What do you think happened?" I asked. She shrugged, dispassionate and calm. "I don't know, Miss Altair, but we'll find out, won't we?" Michael and I went home after that. While I wandered around, trying to reacquaint myself with my life, he got called into work for an emergency. No leeway, no way to beg off. He promised to be home by 8 and left, just like that. Without him, I felt alone and inexplicably afraid, so I decided to take a nap. I had a dream. I think it might be another memory, or close to one. In the dream, I was tiny, maybe 5 or 6. I huddled in a dim, warm room crowded with crying children. Adults in elaborate masks stood in every corner. Occasionally, they laughed and whispered among themselves, sibilants making my skin prickle. The other children wept and wailed around me. Tears streamed down my face, but I refused to make a sound. Something dreadful was coming, a horrific trap closing around me as I sat helplessly. I was going to die. Part of me knew how, but my mind flitted around the edges of it, shying away from knowledge too horrific for anyone, let alone a kindergartner. My breath hitched. To hide it, I looked around, surveying my sniveling companions with false imperiousness. The boy next to me met my gaze defiantly. His eyes were tearless and cold. Jealousy overwhelmed me, along with the terrible realization. He's going to win, I thought. They will choose him. He stared back at me. He had light eyes, a rich caramel gold that nearly glowed in the dim. His mouth twitched, but then he turned away. His imperiousness looked much more genuine than my own, and he looked ahead. Suddenly, a great pair of doors opened. Light cascaded into the room, the light of rich royal gold that spills from the windows of castles. The masked people strode into the center of the room, then filed out. I stood up to follow, so did the boy beside me, as well as a few other children. Most, however, sat sniveling on the floor. As we crossed the threshold, a last masked man swept through the room, barking orders and forcing the snivellers to their feet. I squinted my eyes, less against the light and more against the sheer opulence of the room. Reds, violets, ultramarines, and emeralds, all bathed in a stunning golden glow. The masked people led us down a long blue carpet toward a recessed, tiled pit. Long golden tables lined the carpet. Masked adults in stunning finery sat at the tables, clapping as we passed. I sniffed eagerly, hoping to catch a last whiff of something delicious, but to no avail. Except for dishes, the tables were empty. Not a crumb of food to be seen. Bitterly disappointed, I faced forward again and marched into the pit. As I descended, the opulence dimmed. The pit was disgusting, caked in dark grime and streaked with tacky filth. My bare feet squelched as I stepped in a drying puddle of filth. I looked around and bit back another sob. The walls were sheer, the only exit guarded by impossibly tall adults. There was no way out. The inn was near, and it was as filthy and dark as the pit. This arena. A dozen more masked men entered the pit, neatly arranging themselves along the perimeter. One sidled just behind me. I wanted to move away, but I didn't dare let him see my fear. Somehow I knew that he was, in fact, male. Not every masked adult was, but most of them were. A voice suddenly boomed from overhead, ringing down into the pit like the voice of God.
My children, you're all so special. We love you all.
A few relieved sobs broke like a breathless choir.
Each of you will fulfill that love.
The voice echoed through the pit, making my head ring. I closed my eyes. It was deafening, but somehow, through the din of weeping children and booming God voice, I heard a whisper. "You're going to die tonight." I whirled around. It was the man in the mask. It was a wolf, an ornate thing crafted from glass. I saw my dirty face reflected back at me, all tangled hair and haunted eyes. In the dream, they were a mad swirl of green and gray and copper. "But if you listen to me, you might live." Through the curved eye holes, flashes of color gleamed.
"A very few of you,"
shrieked the voice,
"will fulfill that love over time. Most will fulfill it tonight."
"Whatever you do," the man whispered.
"The winners will be happiest."
God shrieked.
"But we cannot have winners without losers. Who wants to win?"
The cries rose around me in a deafening flood, horror and jubilation in equal measure, rising like a flock of birds.
"Then here, my beloveds, here is how you win."
"Don't scream," the masked man hissed.
"We love to hear screams."
Predictably, a cacophony of screams drowned me. I wanted to scream too, not even for fear, but from pain. I scanned the crowd of shrieking children, looking feverishly around and wondering if I'd been tricked. Through the mass, I saw a pair of familiar caramel eyes. The boy, he wasn't screaming either. He watched me, eyes wide and lips twisted into a confused snarl. I looked distrustfully at the masked man. Deep in the shadows of the wolf's face, I caught glimmers of his mismatched eyes. One blue, one green. Without a second thought, I whirled around and raked my fingernails down the face of the girl next to me. Suddenly, the shrieking and weeping around me dulled. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I tore through the throng, kicking and punching and tearing out locks of hair with such force that the roots came out bloody. On my periphery, I saw the caramel-eyed boy agape. As I was driving my thumbs into the eyes of a toddler, he shook himself and rounded on his neighbor. I looked up and saw a stunning rotunda depicting a hexagon of beautiful landscapes. I did not belong up there, with beauty. Going up to a beautiful place was what happened when you died. Something on the side of the pit caught my eye. I focused. It was a person. Peering over the rim of the pit was a blonde lady with gray eyes and a blue coat fit for royalty. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips as easily as a book. "I will protect you." I woke with a start, not immediately knowing where I was. My face stung and my ears were wet. I sat up, frantically scraping my skin, but it was simply tears. I'd cried so much they'd soaked the hair up my temples and dripped into my ears. I looked at the clock, 7:41, and it all came back to me. What little I remember, that is. I got out of bed with a shudder and dressed myself. Michael didn't get home until 9:30. He was almost absurdly apologetic. To make it up to me, he took me out to what was probably the fanciest restaurant I could have imagined. The place was modern and beautiful and dimly lit, full of greenery and populated exclusively by couples. I looked around anxiously, expecting the woman in the blue coat to appear any moment. The greeter, maitre d', smiled with deferential recognition when he saw me. He wasn't the only one. As he led us to our table, a handful of men nodded in acknowledgement as we passed. As Michael made small talk, I sneaked furtive looks at several couples. Each pair had an uncomfortable commonality, an old man with a subsequently younger partner. I was easily the oldest woman present, except for a scant scattering of seemingly barely legal boys. Michael was the youngest man. In spite of this, I found it surprisingly easy to loosen up in a place that served meals roughly the cost of a car payment. Not that I knew what my car payment was, or if I had my own car at all. By the time the attendant had delivered our drinks, high-end alcohol for Michael and hot tea for me, I was more at ease than I'd been all day. Michael even managed to coax a great deal of laughter out of me. I felt relaxed and safe with him, ever more so when I realized that the woman in the blue coat didn't seem to materialize when Michael was with me. That made it pretty clear to me that she was a delusion. Convincing, yes, and frightening, but ultimately a boogeyman. Maybe the kind only psychological frailty can conjure, but a boogeyman nonetheless. Not that I was entirely happy with Michael. He wouldn't discuss the facility or my illness. He said, let's have a good night and worry about everything in the morning, even though those were the only things I really wanted to talk about. He wouldn't play along though, so instead I accomplished a total inversion of the common first date by asking my husband to tell me about myself. What do I do for a living?
You're an undercompensated creative, literally the best in the world in your field. When we met, I fully intended to get you work with prestigious people in exotic places overseas, but I fell in love with you instead.
How?
Quick and early.
How long have we been married?
5 years in May.
How long have we been together?
From what point?
I looked at him, suddenly unsure. He gave me a wicked little smile, fingers traveling absently over his glass. I felt like he was testing me, but how and why? First night together? First date? What came first? The smile morphed into solemn intent.
Can you tell me?
I shook my head. He smiled guiltily.
We never really had a first date. We had our first night, and that was more or less that.
I waited, painfully aware that one of the pretty young things behind me had begun to cry. I resolved to ignore it, and secretly curse the bastard who broke his naive toy's heart over a decadent meal in a public place full of rich people. Michael took pity on me and said,
We met at the theater 4 years and 2 months ago.
So, we were together for 5 months before we got married?
Were we?
I rolled my eyes and bit back a smile. Stop it. Shit. I covered my mouth instantly, glancing around to see if anyone had heard. Not that I ought to have worried. The girl behind me was whining loudly. Let me ask her, she moaned. Please, just to see. So I assume, I said smoothly, under the circumstances that the theater gave me a nice long chunk of leave.
Don't get any ideas. It's nowhere near over.
Well, all right then. As the girl's irritating whining became louder and more desperate, I looked at my husband and wondered what topics of conversation I was allowed to broach. Work seemed safe so far. Work made me think of Thomas, my boss at the theater. I could see him in my mind's eye, rangy, with striking caramel eyes that did little to offset his perpetual contempt for everyone around him. The memory of him made me think of my dream. I fought off a shiver. Mental illness nightmares really are awful. So, I have a question. Michael's eyes shifted quickly. Tension, exposed for a second, receded as he put on a warm, quizzical smile.
It is?
Thomas and I, did we ever actually become best friends, like you said?
Thomas.
He repeated carefully. The girl at the next table screamed. My heart dropped to my feet. He's my boss. The night we met, he was being an utter jackass, and you told me not to worry, that he'd be my friend before I knew it. Michael had blanched. No trace of his usual smile remained.
How did we meet?
Relieved that I knew at least this story, I related the story quickly. He got paler as I went on, but he didn't look upset. Relieved that I knew at least this story, I related the story quickly. He got paler as I went on, but he didn't look upset exactly. Disbelieving, yes, but not unhappy. I expected encouraging words, maybe even for him to take my hand or brush his thumb across my cheek. What he said was,
That isn't how we met.
Behind us, the girl screeched, and by the sound of it, she flipped a table over. A massive commotion ensued. Michael's eyes went wide. He shot to his feet, motioning frantically for someone to come. When I felt hands, long, soft, supplicating hands kneading my sleeves, I knew why. I looked down. The girl had crawled to me. She knelt awkwardly, crumpling her long limbs so her head didn't rise above my knees. Trails of mascara and eye makeup streaked her face, cutting trails through perfect foundation. She looked so young. A baby, made up in her mother's expensive clothes. Please, she whispered, and rubbed her cheek against my skirt. Her narrow shoulders shook. Please stop them. My throat was inexplicably dry. I could barely speak. It took a Herculean effort to even whisper. I don't know what you mean. She keened miserably. Tears gushed from her eyes. I didn't do anything wrong. I only did what you showed me.
That's enough.
Michael's tone was alien in its shocking coldness. The girl ignored him. She only had eyes for me, apparently. Don't let her take me. It isn't fair. I never screamed, remember? I never screamed. She broke down into wordless mumbling, face buried in my lap. Reflexively, I stroked her hair.
Stop that!
Michael grabbed me roughly and forced me to my feet. As soon as I broke contact, the girl began to scream. 2 men, not the elegant elderly diners, but young men, hard men, hauled her to her feet. She struggled and screamed as she was dragged across the floor towards a discreet door.
Don't let them take me! You promised! Please!
The door shut abruptly, cutting her off. Michael started after, white-faced and furious. When he turned to me, I flinched, but the fury melted into a thin smile.
That was unfortunate.
He took a deep breath, surveying the room.
Shall we go?
I guess so. It was louder than I intended. Bizarrely, a flurry of well-mannered titters followed my pronunciation. It was the old men. The men were laughing, as if I told a sly joke. Michael gave a tight smile, nodded to the host, and made a swift exit. We got to the car. He opened the door for me like a gentleman and climbed into the driver's seat with a smile. I waited for him to start the car, but he didn't. "What happened?" I said.
How would I know? It looked like an unstable woman. They're everywhere if you haven't noticed.
This stung so badly, more than I'd have ever guessed. His hands were trembling. He noticed me noticing and drummed them along the steering wheel to hide it.
You shouldn't have touched her.
She was the one touching me. My voice broke. To my horror, tears pricked my eyes. Without answering, Michael put the car into gear and drove home. I was going to end the update here, but I can't. After that, we went home and were in bed by midnight. We didn't speak a word. I didn't quite dare, and he wasn't forthcoming. I slept briefly, but deeply, only mildly haunted by screaming girls and snarling boys with tawny eyes. Those eyes followed me as I surfaced from sleep. Within a minute, I was wide awake, with no hope of going back to sleep. I got out of bed and glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. Without moving, I counted silently to 60. Michael didn't move except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. I moved to the door on tiptoes, thankful the expensive wooden floor didn't creak, and crept downstairs. Afraid to make any noise, I wandered aimlessly through the lower level. Clean dining room, gleaming bathrooms, pristine living room, and austere guest rooms. For want of anything better to do, I tried the handle on the door to his home office, even though I knew it was locked. Even the kitchen was gloriously neat, not a speck or splatter or a single dish in the sink. I ended my exploration more awake than ever. Feeling defeated, I lowered myself to a seashell-colored sofa I only vaguely recognized. It faced a large bay window. Ambient light bled along the edges of the dark curtains. I focused them, struggling to pick out folds and wrinkles in the dark. There weren't many. The curtains were as immaculate as the rest of the house. With a sigh, I scanned the room, gaze alighting on the coffee table. Among the tasteful arrays of glossy hardcovers was an odd shadow. I reached over, fingers closing on something cool and hard. I brought it close to my face, squinting in the dark. It was a necklace, a pendant molded into the shape of a bull's head, with rubies for eyes. I inspected it closely, marveling at both the craftsmanship and sheer oddity of the thing. After a while, I set it back on the table, feeling tired. I rubbed my eyes and looked over to the window again. The light spilling from the curtains was the unmistakable orange of sunrise. Disbelieving, I went to the window and pulled the panels back. Sure enough, it was morning. A beautiful one, sky streaked with white gold and deep orange and pink clouds. I thought about waking Michael, but I didn't want to talk to him. I was finally starting to feel afraid of him. Feeling defeated, I went to the kitchen. Coffee, cereal, toast, orange juice, it didn't matter. Just something to occupy me, to keep my hands busy while my mind whirled. While I went through the cabinets, looking for a bowl and spoon, I noticed that the coffee pot was half full. Frowning, I held my hand by the carafe. Heat radiated from it. Fresh coffee? Chills ran down my spine. I looked away and saw the sink. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, 2 forks, 2 coffee cups. All were neatly rinsed and stacked. Traces of soft oatmeal clung to one bowl. This wasn't right. It was clean when I'd woken last night. Perfectly clean. Unnaturally clean. Sink empty. Coffee machine spotless and cold. Suddenly nauseous, I spun around and ran upstairs to my bedroom. The door hung partially open. I bust in and froze. Empty. Bed inexpertly made. Fan off, curtains thrown back to welcome the morning. Michael was gone. The beside clock read 7:36. I'd lost 5 hours, and in the interim, my husband had woken, dressed, eaten breakfast with me, and gone off to work. I'd remembered none of it. Which, obvious aside, was a serious pity because I had no idea what, if anything, he told me. I staggered downstairs and collapsed in the couch. I couldn't concentrate. Tears pricked my eyes. I was so focused on blinking them away, on keeping my shaking hand still, that it took me a long time to notice that the bull's head was gone. In its place, resting neatly on the nearest coffee table book, was a manila envelope. Scrawled along the front were 4 words: "You can't tell them." I stared at the envelope for what felt like forever. Then, almost without being aware of it, I struck forward and snatched the envelope. It was light and thin. It couldn't possibly hold much. I fumbled the tab and slid the contents onto my lap. They were photos. The first was of me, but as a child. I couldn't have been more than 7. Long, wavy hair framed my expressionless face. Wide eyes stared blankly into the camera, a severe olivine green. It might have been a beautiful picture were I not so disturbingly blank. I frowned. The picture was wrong, doctored. My eyes weren't green, they were blue, flat gray blue, about as dull as blue eyes can be. Oddly enough, my irises in the photo were raised, bumpy. I flipped the photo around curiously and saw why. Someone had scribbled all over it until it was almost completely black. Through the jags and whorls, I saw the letters R and E, and possibly I farther down the page, but it was impossible to discern with any certainty under the ragged layers of ink. I flipped it back over and stared into child me's wrong eyes. I wore a black long-sleeve dress and a necklace. The bull's head pendant, in fact, the dark dress nearly camouflaged it. But the ruby eyes gave it away. I set it on the sofa and shook out the next picture. It was much more interesting. It was a photo of Michael, staring into the camera with no more expression than the child me. It was almost inhuman, this lack of anything, like a breathing mannequin. He was younger, too, at a glance, no more than 25. That didn't mean anything, though. He didn't even look his age now. Though this portrait was black and white, I imagined I could see the distinct shades of his eyes and the deep auburn of his hair, so dark it was almost black except in sunlight. I turned the photo over. Unsurprisingly, it was also defiled with the wildly cross-hatched ink, but in marker this time. I caught the loops of a single letter near the top. B. I put it in on top of my child portrait and turned to the last photo. It was the most interesting of all. It was her. The woman in the blue coat stood with Michael, standing in a bright, small room crowded with dresses and paint and flats and suits and repurposed bits of carpentry. He draped his arm around her shoulders and wore a small, satisfied smile, almost a smirk. Her grin was so wide, her lips thinned to nothing around her white teeth. She wore a necklace, silver or maybe white gold, littered with tiny blue stones. I knew where they were. Even now I know it better than I know anything else. It was the theater, backstage at my theater. 2 people stood in the background. The first was a stout, stooped man. He stood in such a way that I could only see a sliver of his face. Not much, but enough to tell that he was elderly. Behind him, tall and slender and facing the camera, was Thomas. I couldn't look away from him. He wore that expression I knew so well, that familiar mask of almost impersonal contempt. The lights overhead threw his face into sharp relief and lit his eyes. Even from a distance I could discern the color, clear golden brown. I thought again of my nightmare, of the imperious boy and his snarl as he tore a violent swath through a sea of helpless, terrified children. It couldn't be. That part, it makes no sense and I know it. I do, but Michael and the blonde woman, oh, it makes sense. Or at least it will, very soon. I turned the photo over. Unlike the others, it bore a nonsensical jumble in at least 2 distinct handwritings. Capacity kitten, she was a safe place. Don't, are you there? Silver sapphire, emerald towers. Stop. Watch eyes rose, owl kite timber mirror dove. Stop. Blue fin, I'm here. Gabrielle, blue. Please, she is, no I'm why you're. Don't tell he is a blue. Fuck you. I stood up. The photo slid from my lap, landing face up. The woman beamed up at me. Michael only smirked. After a long moment, I gathered the photos up, stuffed them unceremoniously in the envelope, and ran upstairs and hid it in my dresser. I don't want Michael to find them yet. I've been thinking about this for hours. I won't lie, the portraits confuse me. I don't know what to make of them. I don't know if I want to make anything of them. I don't know if I found them this morning or if he left them. But I think I can figure out what's going on in the picture of him and the woman in the blue coat. Whoever she is, I think they're having an affair. Maybe I knew about it before. Maybe that's what sent me into a breakdown. Maybe that's why he sent me to the facility in the first place. Bad things happened to me, and he felt guilty and came to rescue me, if you will. Maybe these hallucinations are my way of dealing with it. She's an antagonist to me, a danger to my life, so I see her as a threat. Something that threatens and hurts me whenever I see her. Or maybe she isn't a hallucination. Maybe she is real. Maybe she's actually harassing me and Michael is somehow covering it up. I don't know. I don't know about her, about my illnesses, about my history, about the girl in the restaurant, about Richard, or about Thomas. But I'm going to find out. I don't know when Michael is coming home. I don't even remember where he works. I don't even know what he does for a living. But I know he'll come back tonight. And when he does, I'll confront him. One way or another, he's going to tell me what's going on. Here's a summary of everything so far. On Thursday morning, I woke up in the woods outside an inpatient facility where I've apparently been staying. I don't know how long I was there or even why. When I woke up, I had no memory, and someone was sleeping beside me, a younger man I now know as Richard. A woman was there too, a woman in a blue coat. She told me my husband killed her sister and ran off before I could question her. Once she was gone, Richard woke up and my husband, Michael, arrived to pick me up. He didn't seem surprised that I have virtually no memory. He introduced Richard as an assistant and implied that Richard was supposed to act as some kind of babysitter while I recover. We all went out to breakfast, I guess to celebrate my homecoming. At one point, while Richard and Michael were both gone, the blue-coated woman reappeared and attacked me. She disappeared before Michael came back. That night, Michael took me out to an expensive restaurant. One of the women in the restaurant had a breakdown when she saw me and begged me to save her. From what, I don't know. Michael wrote it off as an unstable girlfriend situation. After that awful dinner with the screaming girl, I couldn't sleep. I woke up at 2:30-ish and found a weird pendant in the shape of a bull's head. I played with it for maybe 5 minutes. When I set it down, it was somehow 7:30 a.m. Michael had already left for work. I'd lost 5 hours. Finally, I found 3 photos just sitting on the coffee table, out in the open. One of me as a child, one of Michael as a much younger man, and a recent one of Michael and the woman in the blue coat. This is significant because he keeps telling me she isn't real. And here we are. This morning, I wandered around the house for hours. I searched every room, trying to find something, anything that would explain what's wrong with me. The only locked room was Michael's office. There are 2 locks, a keypad, and a print reader. I tried, but there was no way. I berated myself all morning. I had so many questions and never managed to ask a single one that meant anything. Never challenged Michael's deflections. Had my life always been this way? Is that why I was in inpatient care? Because I'd trapped myself with an abusive man? Enormous as it was, the house felt suffocating and false, like a model home for a little doll. What a bad little doll I am. Sometime around 11, several sharp booms echoed through the empty living room. I nearly screamed, expecting Michael to burst through at any moment. Then it occurred to me, Michael wouldn't knock. I had a visitor. Thomas and the crying girl and the tittering old men from last night swept through my mind's eye, but mostly I thought of the woman in the blue coat. That's what I wanted, though, wasn't it? Michael wasn't telling me anything, but she would. Hell, she's the only one who's told me anything so far. I opened the door, expecting the worst. It was Richard. Disappointment and profound relief nearly made my knees buckle. "Hi," I said. He smiled nervously.
Just the person I was hoping to see.
I couldn't hide my surprise. Really?
Yeah, I tried to call you. Then I wanted to give it to Mr. Altair, but, well, it's not that easy.
Dread coiled in my guts. The last thing I wanted to do was give Michael paperwork or some stupid trinket he left at work before I confronted him. Give what to him? Richard fished around in his pocket and extracted something.
It was in my coat, at the center. I think you maybe gave it to me? To prove you were a better friend or whatever. Here.
He extended his hand. A bracelet sat in his palm. It was stunning. White gold, or possibly platinum, glittering with diamonds and white opals. I took it gingerly, feeling inexplicably embarrassed. Would you like to come in?
Oh, no.
He cringed, then stammered.
I was actually on my way to lunch.
A nervous beat.
Would you like to come? I have another helmet. We can start getting to know each other since we're best friends and all.
I'd already begun formulating a plan. Since you're going to be my day nurse, you mean? He swallowed hard.
It's not like that.
Ease up. I was kidding. Lunch sounds fantastic. He perked up considerably. I don't have any money on me, but I'll make Michael comp you. We rode into the city. He took me to a salad bar, and I, mustering all of my unremembered charm, put him at ease before moving in for the strike. Richard, can I ask you something? It's okay if you can't answer, or don't want to. He cocked his head to the side, silky hair spilled across his shoulder.
This sounds ominous.
It probably is. I hesitated artfully. Do you know what's wrong with me?
What kind of best friend would I be if I didn't? But seriously, yeah, Mr. Altera filled me in. Don't worry, I'm really not bothered.
That's not what I mean. Suddenly his expression became guarded. I rushed in. I know it sounds crazy, but I basically don't have any memory. I know who Michael is. I know I work at a theater, but that's pretty much it. I don't even know what's wrong with me, and Michael won't tell me.
Sounds about right. He had to write it out for me, and it took like 4 days for half a page. It made him choke up. I don't think he likes thinking about it.
I could barely contain my excitement. But, you know? He frowned.
Yeah, you really don't?
No.
Are you sure you want to?
Positive.
Sure you want me to be the bearer of bad news?
I cracked a smile. Since I have the choice, I'd much rather hear it from a friend.
I don't know the details, but you were badly abused as a child. Like, badly. He said you've had PTSD the whole time he's known you, but you kinda kept it under wraps or handled it or whatever. Until a dam broke. That's what he wrote down. The dam broke. Don't know the details, like I said, but you ended up checking yourself into that place to try to reset for good. Something went really wrong. I don't know anything about that, except he pulled you out and is ready to sue the shit out of them.
I didn't know what to think. Couldn't even remember how to feel. How long have you been working for him?
A couple of weeks. It's great, especially compared to what I was doing before.
He paused.
Are you okay? Look, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have...
No, I said quickly. Thank you. On impulse, I grabbed his hands and squeezed them. Thank you so much. I had so many more questions, but they weren't his to answer. I'm lucky he knew as much as he did. By that point, we'd finished eating. He went to pay the bill. I lingered at the table, wondering what to do. Go home, track Michael down at work, hang out with Richard, kicking around town like a pair of high school burnouts. Should I distract myself or focus on this new information? Focusing seemed like the adult thing to do, but if I had a past like Richard had described, did I even want my memories back? I recognized my husband, knew the specifics of my job. Wasn't that enough? Wouldn't I be better off with a fresh start? What if I was trying to undo a blessing? Richard came back, smiling sheepishly.
So...
He rocked back and forth on the balls of his feet.
What do you like to do?
Since I can't remember what I liked to do, we decided to do things he liked, which included rifling through an old-school record store, eating churros, and wandering around the rose gardens. It was a good afternoon. I felt comfortable with him, at ease. We talked about a lot of nothing. Finally, as afternoon veered toward sunset, he opened up about himself.
I've been singing since I was a preschooler. I don't have anything else. Used to sing myself lullabies.
That's so sad.
It's turning out kind of well lately. I'm lucky I'm working with Michael. He can open doors. I'm hoping one will open for me.
He gulped the last of a churro.
What about you?
What about me?
What are you hoping for?
I smiled easily. Friends. It was a dodge, and a stupid one at that, but he blushed a little. So are you in a band? He shook his head.
Solo. I mean, I've worked with a couple of house bands, but that's all.
Do you have any shows coming up?
You just missed it.
Suddenly self-conscious, he said.
I do open mic nights, though.
After some wheedling, he ran home to pick up his guitar, and we found a place that conveniently started open mic around lunchtime. Richard's work was beautiful. Not enough to make me forget that I was about to confront my much older, presumably much more powerful husband over a possible affair and several other issues, but the music was enough to make it seem almost unimportant. Richard's voice was ethereal, creating a vivid impression of a green-eyed girl. I idly wondered if it was based on a real person and what she might look like. Thin and tall like him, I decided. Bright red hair and milky skin to make those eyes shine like emeralds. When he finished and came back to the table, I hugged him. "That was gorgeous. You'll be a superstar in no time."
I'll settle for regular royalties,
he said, unable to disguise how pleased he really was. I lavished him with praise for a little longer. It was the least I could do, given that he'd single-handedly created a damn good afternoon out of ashes. Then excused myself. When he asked why, I bluntly said, "Bathroom," and he visibly cringed. It made me laugh. When I was halfway across the floor, I even spun around to revel in his discomfort again, but something was wrong. Right next to him, where I'd been sitting 4 seconds ago, was a woman with an enormous golden headdress, the massive head of a bull, with an open, elongated jaw lined with improbable fangs. Ropes of gemstones hung from treacherously curled horns. I blinked and she was gone. I turned hastily, hoping Richard hadn't seen my face, and nearly ran to the bathroom. Blood pounded in my ears. I felt sick and dizzy. Broken, like I was coming unmoored from my body and dissipating like smoke. By a massive stroke of luck, the bathroom was empty. Unable to help myself, I looked over my shoulder one last time and immediately bit back a scream. The bull stood in the center of the floor, watching me. Bright, arterial blood flowed down her thighs, pooling around her bare feet scored with hideous gashes. I blinked again. Gone. It was gone. Of course it was gone. It wasn't even real. And I dashed into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I slid to the floor, my gorge rising and my tears stung in my eyes. What was I going to do? It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. So why did I have to see it? Apparently, I had already lived through horror, so why did I have to manufacture more? I furiously wiped my eyes. I didn't want Richard to know I'd been crying. I didn't want Michael to know either. I groaned. I still had to talk to him. Still had to confront him about the woman in the blue coat. How did I forget? Why had I wasted the day with a 25-year-old stranger when I had these things, these actually important things to think about? More tears threatened to pour down my face. Wanting to distract myself long enough to get back on an even keel, I pulled the bracelet out of my pocket. It was breathtaking. So beautiful, I didn't want to wear it on the motorcycle in case it flew off somehow. But it would be nice to wear it. Nice to see what it looked like on my wrist. Maybe it would feel normal, comforting.
"Don't put it on!"
The voice cracked across the bathroom, roaring off the walls. I spun around, thinking of empty golden tables and a sadistic god coaxing screams from children, and froze. It was her, the woman in the blue coat, yet again.
"Rachel, don't put it on!"
Scared to the point of mindlessness, I thrust my hand out, offering it to her wordlessly. She reared back like a vampire from across.
No, put it away! Put it away now!
Feeling inexplicably hurt as well as lost, I clumsily stuffed it back in my pocket. She exhaled shakily.
Don't put it on. I don't care what they say. Whatever you do, don't put it on.
Whatever you do, don't scream. Who are you? I asked, figuring it would be a good idea to get the question in before she assaulted me again.
Nothing anymore.
Her face twisted.
A ghost.
Were you Michael's mistress? Are you? She laughed, wet and thick, more like a sob than anything else.
Never.
I drew a deep breath. Here it was, the real question. Why did he kill your sister? Her lips split into a snarling leer. Tears gushed down her face.
Because he's such a fucking coward freak, he had to do what they said. All of them are like him. You can't trust them, not a single one.
I don't know what you mean. The words issued from my throat as a miserable high keen. Her shoulders heaved and she laughed miserably. She was beautiful, delicate and fey, the features almost inhuman.
I know. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a broken kitten, you're a stupid lamb. We're done.
Desperate knocking shocked me out of my reverie. I jumped and whirled to the door. Just a second! What are you, fucking in there or something? The strained voice was definitely female, definitely desperate. Hurry up! Heart pounding, I turned back to the blue-coated woman. She was gone. I shuddered and covered my mouth as I started to cry. Am I crazy, or was she in fact a ghost? Impervious to the storm of knocking and swearing on the other side of the door, I washed my face. As I patted my skin dry, I noticed my eyes. My eyes, which were supposed to be blue, are green now, olivine with flecks of copper. I didn't have time to care, not then. Praying the bull had followed the blue-coated woman into the ether, I opened the door and ducked out. Richard was waiting at the table, in clear high spirits. I shook him off, said I was suddenly ill and needed to go home. He obliged. We wound our way through traffic. The motorcycle was a miracle, navigating the gulch of vehicles 3 times faster than any car. Richard wanted to help me inside the house, but I didn't let him, partly from pride, mostly from fear. I immediately regretted my decision, however. The instant I stepped inside, the house seemed to bear down on me, a haunted thing ready to crush its dollies flat. I tried to ignore it, tried to do what I needed to do. I retrieved the manila envelope and studied each photo within, trying to formulate my questions for Michael. But my mind wouldn't work. It was blank and sick and buzzing, carrion covered in flies. I couldn't take it anymore, so I went outside. As soon as I stepped into the sunlight, layers of anxiety and fear slowed off me like a rotten cocoon. I felt free, even safe. Re-energized and basking in the feeling of relief, I explored the yard. There wasn't much, an environmentally responsible garden of native plants, short rock walls, and an orange tree. I picked an orange and continued my rounds. When I saw a box by the back door, I didn't think anything of it. UPS or FedEx, I thought. Maybe even something that would give me an extra insight on my life. I picked it up eagerly. It was shockingly heavy for its size. No address, no postage, nothing. I shook it experimentally. The thudding shuffle indicated paperwork. Suddenly afraid, I looked around. Nothing but my empty yard, the road, and the canyon. I tucked the box under my arm and went into the kitchen. It took a long time for me to muster the bravery to open it. Sure enough, it was full of paper. It looked innocent enough, except for the note at the top. Call me right away. I stared at the handwriting, willing myself to recognize it, but it was no use. Finally, I set it aside and started in on the pile. It included a number of records and photographs. I'm overwhelmed. I can't possibly describe them all, but here's what I found out. I didn't legally exist until I was 13. I was rescued after a van crash during a high-speed chase, and promptly dropped into foster care. They actually didn't even know if I was really 13. That's just what they guessed. I was rescued with 5 other children, including a boy named John Thomas Morrow. 4 months ago, someone named John Thomas Morrow reported me missing. As of Christmas Eve, John Thomas Morrow is also a missing person. I don't work for a theater. I actually never worked for a theater. My only employment record is for the illuminatingly named Blue Industries. According to my tax returns, I'm a millionaire. Michael has 4 passports and as many different names. I have 7. Michael is also a licensed psychiatrist but isn't actively practicing, so where the goddamn fuck does he go every day? I've had 4 stillbirths in the last 12 years. Finally, Michael and I have not been married for 5 years, as he claimed last night. We've been married for 14 years, since my legally determined 18th birthday. I didn't wait, I just gathered everything up. These papers, the photos in the manila envelope, and my computer, and left. I'm still in the city, in public. Seems counterintuitive, but I think I'm safer around other people. I'm dressed well, I'm reasonably pretty. If something happens, I think people will help me. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know who left the box of paperwork. I don't know how to find them. I'm really hoping they find me, because I don't have anywhere to go, and there's nothing I can do.